be on.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another mid-month mental wellness check-in for Calm in the Chaos. I'm Michelle Beatty, project manager and creator of Keep Your Stride platform that focuses on mental health wellness for project management professionals. It is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I have all the feelings. Like I'm really excited about the awareness that's being given to such an important focus that impacts all of us personally and professionally.
Facts, facts. And I am Valerie Carmel Dorsonville, a licensed therapist, and I am also part of this wonderful mid-month check-in, really providing some insight and some feedback and some tools from a mental health therapist standpoint. So, I love Mental Health Awareness Month. That's my jam.
It has to be your jam. It's your profession. So, yeah, all the things. So, this month, Valerie wanted us to focus on how project managers, we can own curating a company culture that that nurtures our mental health in regards to how we manage our projects, like how we can lead. So, Val, you want to share a little more insight on why you thought this would be a great topic for this month for us to address, creating a culture of care?
Yes, absolutely. So, in providing therapy to quite a few project managers, I'm beginning to notice a couple trends that are happening with many of the concerns and reasons why they're coming into therapy. And so, as a result of that, I felt it would be really appropriate to utilize our platform as well as the Mental Health Awareness Month to really kind of maybe like tease out and dissect a little bit more as to what is ultimately contributing to people's challenges within their mental health as it relates to work in particular, and what that work stress could be ultimately and how that work stress is ultimately impacting that.
It's true, because one thing I often say when we have our mid month check ins is that project managers, we are the temperament lifeline to a project. Like our mood can really impact how our team shows up, how they address the work. If we're frazzled, it might make them frazzled. So if we're encouraged and optimistic, it can course correct, in a high stressful moment, how they interact. So I think this is a great topic. And I'm so happy that you challenged in our conversations preparing, like you challenge, you're like, no, we really need to talk about this. I'm like, okay, let's go for it. So let's start off with how has your definition of success changed and how has that influenced your team?
So I think in historically, when we're looking at overall success, it's really about KPIs, right? What are those key performance indicators that we are really ultimately looking at in terms of deliverables and really concrete things? And I feel like over time, my definition of success has started to really incorporate aspects that are not necessarily based off of very tangible, um, concrete points, but more so abstract and um, mental wellness points. So things related to how people's well-being are ultimately showing up as part of that project. For me, it's about how are we actually working together and getting to our success point, and not just the fact that we got there. What did the journey look like from point A to point B? Were everybody in sync? Were people going together, or did we feel like people were dragging themselves across to the finish line? Right. And I think those are the things that sometimes in professional spaces really can get honestly overlooked and really kind of de deprioritized when we are focusing on our goals, right? So I think from and that's kind of coming into a space in terms of like even within mental health, even within working with other project managers about what does that look like for them. So in your example, like in your case, as being a person who's directly in the industry day in and day out, have you noticed your own sense of of success change from when you first came into, your career in comparison to now?
I think so. When you first get into project management, I think if you're not aware, of what your role is, the for me, it's remembering that I am not a decision maker.
Mm.
Number one, I'm not a decision maker. And I am a leader at the same time. So my approach is important in that. And also, by me not being a decision maker, so what does the leadership mean? That means shedding light on things that are not being addressed. That's also focusing on risk. That's also, you know, demonstrating empathy, demonstrating psychological safety. And I believe as I've evolved as a project manager over the years, not only is my focus, to your point, the KPIs, but my focus is also the end user experience, right? So
Love
to
that.
me, success, a big part of the success of what I do is, what is the end user experience? What are my stakeholders' takeaway? Was it an abrasive experience for them? Was it stressful for everyone involved? Was the communication good? Could it have been better? Were people feeling triggered, right? As we were advancing through the project, what was that experience? Because you want your stakeholders and your team to work with you. So to me, success is when my team and those that I work with, they feel heard, they feel seen. Things that they bring to the attention is addressed. They can see where it was addressed in a chat, in a conversation, whatever applicable at that point. I think that's very key, because at the end of the day, we come to work, yes, because it supports our lives, but you really want to contribute to someone enjoying the work that they do, even when it's stressful, right? Even when it's stressful, even when you're like, this is like a lot going on, but they like working with you through it all. Like you're in boots to the ground together. So for me, success is making every effort for the end user experience to be a good one, despite the situation, despite the outcome. And also for me, success is, did I learn something new about myself in the process? Did I have an aha moment in the process that helps me be more in tune to how I communicate and interact with my team?
I love that. I really, really love the incorporation of the introspection, and not just from the standpoint of how everything kind of gelled on the outside and how it looked in terms of how we got to our destination, but ultimately where you were able to experience your own level of growth, whether that sparked either professional growth or personal growth. And I do think that the paying attention to the journey is super important from a mental health standpoint. Because when we're talking about how we show up in spaces in terms of responding to stress, right, it is a natural reaction to our bodies to kind of become very elevated in response to periods of high intensity, right? And a lot of a lot of my patients, what I will notice when I'm working with them is when I can usually tell where they are in their sprint based off of how they're showing up in session. So what will happen is at the beginning of the sprint, they're like excited, they're charged up, they're ready to go. And then the longer it starts to go on, like I can see like this, like essentially like fumes starting to come off of them. And what happens is the reality is our bodies are not designed to go through long periods of chronic stress. Our bodies are designed to like go through a period of stress and then come back down, rest, restore, and then prepare for the future, for the next thing. But when you're going through long periods of time with high levels of stress and very short periods of restoration, what happens is that you've messed up your body's ability to effectively regulate itself and restore itself. So people end up into a place almost of like functional collapse where they're resting, but they still feel exhausted. So they're just watching TV, vegging out, doing things that feel okay, but ultimately they're not able to ever really feel that sense of restorative space and feel fulfilled and be able to fully bounce back for the next project. So I love the fact of you really highlighting like what was that the end user experience, because I love that part. So
And well, first I'll say thank you. And then I want to share that I think a key to that piece of the end user experience, and to your point, nourishing your, making sure not sacrificing your mental wellness in this journey, right, is the power of communication. I would say not only just the power of communication, right, but the impact of good communication.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So asking for help, saying, I'm not aware, I do not know, those right there, it brings the human piece into it, right? And also, it might actually diffuse someone that might not be prepared to share something, right? Or they don't know if what they're going to say is valid. Like, okay, well, she's not aware, then let me see how I can give some information. It positions them to step up and be that subject matter expert, right? To like
Yeah.
give that information, which can take the weight off you as a project management professional, because you realize where your allies are, you realize where your resources are that have that whatever type of information you need, archival process, or just understanding the vision of the project. They have an intuitive understanding of the scope.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, with that being said, right? Because we talked about, the periods where things are heightened and it's kind of go, go, go season. So, like for you, how does your team kind of respond to when seasons are a little bit slower? Like you're in between projects, or maybe you're kind of waiting for a new project to start. How do you kind of support them through that experience?
I've seen it unpack in different ways in different roles that I've had, right? So when it was the slow season, it was annual, like you knew what to expect. Beginning of the year, slow, mid-year, it starts to pick up, and then, it's go, 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 go. And then it has like when it gets to winter, right before the holidays, you start entering your slow season. So one thing that leadership would actually ask or encourage everyone to do, I'm sure if everyone did it, but they encourage everyone to take their vacation time during the slow time. So they're rested
Mhm.
coming back into the high volume season, right?
Love it.
They will prefer, it was preferred, not directed, that they would want you to take your vacation time during that time, or if you knew you had, some personal things going on, to plan during the downtime so you could be back on, refreshed, ready to go during the high volume season. And another role that I was in during the slow season, right? One thing that I thought was interesting is that sometimes imposter syndrome would creep in on people.
Mm.
Sometimes they were like, well, there's no work. Am I going to have a job tomorrow? And it's like, you got to understand your industry. You got to understand your role. But if you aren't, based off of previous experiences, what that can impact that. It could be a performance review. It could be another role. It could be not understanding the business cycle, right? Not understanding the processes and how they roll out. It can come across in different ways, where half the team was like, no, this is what happened. This is how we roll. And some people are like, oh my, they're clutching pearls for sake of conversation, just trying to um, understand the culture, right? To our
Yeah.
point that we're discussing, they're understanding the culture. And then I've also been in roles where we just, shift, we pivot, we focus on, documentation, we focus on assessing the processes and making sure that we're doing what we need to do. We're in align with our big picture vision, our big picture plan. So I just think it just depends on the industry and the role and also the experience. But I think it's very key to be open to realizing the power of community. So when you're talking to other project managers in different industries, what does that look like? What does that mean? I mean, what do you see as you're working with different people in project management and also in information technology? What have you like? Have you had to talk anyone off the wall? Like,
Um, Pretty frequently, actually. I think, I find that people who tend to kind of go into these very fast-paced industries are very accustomed to a particular tempo in the way that they work.
mhm,
And so oftentimes that tempo in the way that they approach work can often become part of their identity, right? So there's this concept of as it relates to like a hamster on a wheel, right? And so what will ultimately happen over time is that sometimes that the hamster can become somewhat addicted to the wheel and the movement that that wheel kind of creates for them. And so in similar fashion, I oftentimes see people become somewhat addicted to the tempo and the way that they work. So even in periods of slowness, even when they are anticipated periods of slowness, in terms of the cyclical nature of whatever industry they're in, it still creates a level of like anxiety and worry and distress for them, even when their body is basically showing them the cues that it needs rest. And I think it's important to really, one, normalize the cyclical nature of whatever industry that you are in.
mhm.
Like for me, as a mental health therapist, for me, I have noticed an increase in referrals tend to happen right before the holidays when
Mhm.
people are about to, have to go visit, family for Thanksgiving, or like have to contend with either periods of loss or conflict. And that's when, for me, typically there's a surge of, um, of referrals that I'll get. But sometimes during the summer, there's usually a little bit of a dip because people are traveling and they're like, no, I'm feeling good. I don't necessarily feel the need to continue in therapy. So even in an industry like mine, there are still those cyclical natures. And I think it's important to really normalize that as part of life.
Yeah.
And two, really recognize and optimize that time. Right. So I love the idea of using that time to maybe plan more vacations or kind of tighten up different processes or different areas within the scope of your work that you maybe don't necessarily have time to really address when you're actively working on a project, but can ultimately really set you up effectively for when you're in that work. So I thought that was great.
It is great. You know what came to mind when you were sharing that, because you're navigating all these different emotions that can impact a culture, um, from a mental health perspective when managing project, is career grief.
Oh
And
yeah.
and then I might even want to even go as far as to label as project grief. Like if a project doesn't go as intended, or a project is tabled to another time, or there's all it can be impacted by budget, it can be impacted, the scope change. I mean, there's so many different factors that can impact a project not reaching all the way to the done stage. It gets canceled or postponed. And I think that is something that can impact culture, just from talking with other project managers, out, in the community, in my industry. I think that is something that is not discussed.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are
I,
your thoughts on that? I know it's like random, but
no, no, no. I think that that's, I mean, to be very frank, I think that that occurs way more often than people will, are often willing to be transparent about. Because the reality is that loss comes in all types of forms. And sometimes the loss is not necessarily the thing that you already had that you lose, but essentially the expectation of what you were going to have that you didn't get. And that is a different type of loss, especially if that type of loss occurs multiple times. I find that people often will begin to internalize external outcomes. So let's say project managers on, they're on a particular project and maybe that one gets tabled. Okay, fine. That was uncomfortable. And they're like, all right, then I get moved to something else. And then something else happens with that project. And then happens again to a third project. Now,
Mhm.
at this point, people start to like, not like, what are you talking about? Is it me? Like, why don't people want to pick me to be on? It becomes this, this inner battle of trying to identify what is the issue with their consistent loss and how and what way they are contributing to that loss, when in some situations that has nothing to do with that. And helping them to unravel that thinking and really identify where is this self-judgment, where is this fear ultimately stemming from, and really allowing them the opportunity to, one, name the loss and
Mhm.
acknowledge that it's okay to have that loss in order for them to really begin to let that go. So I really love that level of awareness and astuteness in regards to that piece of loss, because I really think it's not something that many people will even recognize as a form of loss, but in terms of response to it, it absolutely is.
So I have a question for you. The best time, a possible good time, not, I don't want to say best, a possible good time to address that could be in a team meeting, right? So what would that look like? How would someone bring that up? Like, should it be discussed on a regular basis? Like, how do you bring that up in a way that it's not, you're not perceived as pessimistic, and you can turn it into a growth moment of acceptance of this is just how things are in our culture, just like brushing your teeth every day, right? These are things that we have to accept. We need to ensure we have good mental health moving forward, like we have good hygiene.
Yeah. And when we're talking about creating that culture within an organization, it isn't necessarily about the check boxes. It's about what you're modeling for everybody else. It's about normalizing the experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the position where you notice, okay, you've been working on a couple projects, and so each time something changes, it's appropriate to then say, you know what, let's debrief. Like, I know, and my favorite phrase, called a thing a thing. Like, okay, we've had these recent experiences, and initiate that conversation with your own transparency, because people are going to be a lot more open to sharing and really being really vulnerable if you're able to model that level of vulnerability even within professional spaces. So calling it out, normalizing, like, hey, I've noticed X, Y, and Z has occurred. Even I even have moments where I wonder about, what does this mean? Is anybody else having similar thoughts? And then
Mm-hmm.
allow people to share and validate that. It doesn't necessarily, people aren't necessarily always looking for the answer to the problem. Sometimes they just want somebody to recognize that there is a problem. Like, if you just acknowledge that this thing is happening and we are feeling a type of way about it, sometimes just that can really begin to create a lot more cohesion within teams, a lot more trust within teams, and effectively a lot more communication.
Well, let's keep that going. Let's talk a little bit more about how do conversations about mental health shape team culture. So we just talked about project grief. What are some other aspects or focus points that you think project managers should be mindful of?
I think one of the things to consider is the emotional labor that project managers usually have to take on, right? In terms of being the person who is kind of the glue that kind of holds all of that stuff together. Oftentimes you are getting not just the feedback essentially about the project in and of itself, but also how people are feeling in the midst of that piece. And so acknowledging that there is a lot of invisible work that project managers are effectively doing that isn't necessarily written into your job description. And I think being able to acknowledge that that even is a thing, that it even exists, can really be really create ultimately a culture where people can see other people speak up. People don't know what's acceptable until they see it, right? If you are in a space where people are openly communicating, sharing their concerns, but also providing solutions, you feel more encouraged and emboldened to do the same. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're in spaces where people are ignoring the fact that times are difficult, ignoring people who, ignoring the tension, ignoring the intensity of what's going on, then what you ultimately communicate is it's not okay to speak up, that this is not a safe space, and issues will be avoided. And so ultimately, it isn't just what the things we say that convey what we mean, but it is your lack of a response is also a response. And so by not kind of shining light on these areas, you ultimately end up skipping things that are necessary for people to, you end up missing out on opportunities to really kind of foster that in spaces. And so, in your own experience, when you've been, on teams, have you seen mental health kind of shaped in as part of a company's culture? And have you seen times where it's been done really, really well?
I don't, I won't say company culture.
Mhm.
I will say team culture.
That's fair. That's fair.
I would say team culture. And I've seen it, I've been in roles where I've seen it dismissed.
Mm.
Um, and then I've seen it to where it's celebrated. I remember one time working remotely, the whole team was off. This was in one of my roles. The whole team was off, and the whole team was remote. And the leader was like, "Everyone's off today. I think we need a nap." I was like, "What?"
Good. So good. Get a little siesta in here. I love that.
I was like, "This is magical." And she's like, "Okay, let's take 45 minutes. Whatever you do within that 45 minutes is up to you, but I encourage you to take a nap and we'll come back." Everyone came back on time. In the meeting, everyone was more alert, more aware, and productive. So I think a lot of times what I've experienced, just for me personally, is that mental wellness is a focus for leadership based off of their own experiences, their
Mm.
own needs, and I won't say that leaders don't see the value in it, but I think when it impacts them navigating burnout, that's like a frequent theme here in our conversation is burnout,
Mm.
but also just, brain fog, just, needing to take a moment to breathe, just to break up the monotony, back to back meetings. You're not really, when you're not scheduling any time for a bio break. These are real things that sometimes people are not able to do, but that does impact you, right? Because it's like, I'm so inundated, I don't even have a chance to eat or walk my dog or take care of nature's way, however. So I just find it to be a situation where I think leaders, to your point, which we talked about in this conversation, they model it, and over time it becomes a focus because it's what sometimes modeled versus said. You give them that 5-minute break in between, you schedule that 5-minute break in between meetings, or 10-minute break if you're able to, in between meetings, so they can breathe, they can eat, they can do whatever they need to do. I think that's critical. I think that it still has some stigma attached to it to a degree, but I think because different HR departments and groups, employee relation groups, like, this is something that we need to focus on, I think sometimes people almost feel like it might reveal something about them that might not be favorable. And to your point,
Mm.
what does that look like? Like, how do you demystify that, right? How do you say, look, we all deal with this in some form or fashion, it just looks differently. I think that's where, to your point that you were sharing earlier, the importance of establishing trust so you can have that conversation in a capacity that's comfortable for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I can appreciate your point earlier too about maybe maybe there's a level of maybe there's a level of this lack of awareness from leadership that comes from a lack of lived experience. And if that is not how you are, if people don't respond to a problem unless it's their problem in most cases, right? A problem for you, if it's not impacting me, it can be oftentimes very, very difficult for a person to be able to fully understand and grasp and grasp the impact of that. It requires a lot of empathy to be able to do that when you're not in the situation and really effectively understand how somebody else feels. And so I think to that end, another thing that I think is important is this idea of being able for leaders to understand the very real and tangible kind of like benefits of being able to model that effectively, right? I think in
Mhm.
some spaces people feel like, okay, that's just too much fluff. It's not necessary. It's kind of going to take away from the hard, tangible, concrete tasks that need to be done. But the reality is that when you are able to create spaces where people experience psychological safety, ultimately it improves team morale and it helps to reduce the stigma because people feel that it is okay for them to be transparent and be authentic. And that opens up further lines of communication. So I think one, for leaders to recognize that even if there is not a necessarily lived experience and there may not necessarily be a direct tangible kind of benefit that you're seeing, by the end of this meeting, that doesn't mean that you're not creating an ultimate culture that's going to have additional benefits, much further down the line. So I think that that's something also to consider.
I appreciate that you just referenced that it's in essence a journey, right? Where we are today versus, and it's interesting. It doesn't have to be your personal journey, right? It could be watching a leader or even a member of a team. It's not restricted to leadership, right? Say
Mm-hmm.
someone's grieving the loss of a loved one, how they were treated in that process by the team, by the leader, says a lot, right, about the
Mm-hmm.
company culture. I think recognizing what the optics of mental wellness and how you can show up for someone and nurture someone's mental wellness. We just talked about project grief. We talked about loss of someone. We talked about celebrating, recognition, honoring efforts made, right? That's a whole thing. Also, how you schedule. It's like the small things really reiterate the awareness. And what does
Yeah.
that look like? I know like one time, you know, sometimes companies will send out gift cards, like buy yourself something that you like, or, they like, I know if you work in retail, sometimes, they give like the kudos cards, that's not
Mm-hmm.
just retail, that's different because you do virtual and in person. But it's just, it's like, I would, just listening to, as we're talking this out, I think what comes to mind is the essence of it is in consistent small endeavors, small actions, it's a very stereotypical small actions lead to something big, but it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It may feel in the beginning like a drop in the bucket, right? But the reality is that change is incremental. It isn't I always give my patients this example. I'm like, it isn't that the first day that you go to the gym and you do 5 sit-ups that now you got a six pack. No, ma'am, that is not, that is
You
not
can't
how that,
count them down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's all there.
and then we got it. No, it is it, you will, it is unlikely that you're going to see the benefits of the work that you're putting in today,
Mm.
weeks and sometimes months, even years from now. And so it's important to make sure that we recognize, yes, it may feel like a small step, but but every journey is built up of nothing but multiple small steps.
Okay,
So,
Val. So let's take it to the next level of conversation. What role do team norms play? Because we're kind of touching upon it now. So what
mhm.
role do team norms play in supporting or undermining mental health?
Ooh, that's a big one. I
We're peeling back the onion.
right. I mean, I think the norms play a huge role, right? Because ultimately, our norms are the things that really create the the unspoken guardrails on how we show up.
Mm,
Right.
tell me more.
So, like when you think about the things that are, I'll give you an example. If I had a manager years ago who had a particular thing about um, She never liked to be blindsided, even if it was bad. Like she want to know just in case. And so over time, it just became the norm that if I had a spicy interaction with someone, then it was like as soon as I got off the call, I'm calling her. Hey, FYI, dot thing just happened.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
good. It's good, but just for you to know. So that because that was just became an unspoken rule because it lets you know how to interact and how to engage effectively in such a way that it builds trust within your team.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the way that can, undermine your team is when things are frequently inconsistent. Nothing hurts a team more than inconsistency. So if you do something for this one and then the next person has a similar situation and there is a completely different response, people don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
A lack of understanding of what to expect creates uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds fear and detachment. So if those are the ways of really trying to be intentional about creating norms within your teams that really convey the kind of leader that you want to be. You have to you and the kind of colleague that you want to be. If you want to be seen as a person who is, competent, consistent, very engaged, then that is not something that you have to, walk around with a with a with the sign that says
Yeah.
I'm consistent, I'm competent, you know. No, people see that based off of your consistent behavior, and ultimately that becomes the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So, really creating consistency around the positive actions and behaviors and expectations ultimately begins to form the kind of environment and form the norms that you ultimately want.
I love it. I want to walk it back just a bit
Mhm.
to detachment. When you mentioned detachment, so what are your suggestions in regards to when a leader is all in for mental wellness best practice, which could be something one might think is small, is but not, is taking your PTO, and the team does not, they frown upon it. Well, I have this, I have that, deadlines, whatever the rhetoric may be, right? So they're not showing alignment, they're not showing buy-in, but the leader is attempting to promote that. How can that turn into a culture shift that's embraced?
One, I think it can be shifted by ultimately creating the very tangible things to support people's sense of ease in order to do it.
Mm.
It's one thing to tell people to take your PTO, right? That's fine. But if you have not created a team environment in which people are comfortable stepping in and stepping up for their colleagues, taking PTO is hard. You have to feel like you have people are going to be more comfortable taking PTO when they know that when they step away that they can trust their team to handle it. That they're not going to literally walk back in and have 125 emails that they have to now sift through, right? So it isn't just the communication and saying yes it's okay, but you also have to facilitate it being okay. There has
Mm-hmm.
to there has to be both. It can't just, I encourage my patients that and remind them that change is not a philosophical exercise. There has to be actions behind it. So if you want people to be more comfortable in taking their PTO and being able to, really lean into taking care of themselves and managing their mental health, you have to create structure and framework in order for that to occur. Because without it, people are going to feel torn.
Mm-hmm.
Who are not who have maybe worked in other work experiences where it was yes these things are okay, but ultimately behind the curtain it's really not. And so we have to be mindful that people have worked in other spaces, been on other teams, and they may not necessarily feel like your encouragement to take that time off and to really prioritize your mental health as genuine. They may think it's just lip service.
And that just takes time
Yep.
and consistency, right?
It,
Whew.
that's it. So for you, especially in concepts of, in your role of kind of guiding how people are going, do you feel like there are particular ways that as a project manager you can really kind of guide the workflow to help kind of manage some of those aspects of that?
Stick to the process.
Mm.
Stick to the process. I mean, pivots happen, but in my humble opinion, you should realign to whatever process the process that that organization or that team is practicing. People customize stuff all the time. So whatever, if you have a PMO or, you're working with a myriad of your project team has scrum masters, program managers, project managers. What is that workflow that you all agree on, and stick to it? Stick to it. And, there's no one thing I love about project management. There's no room for elitists.
I absolutely love that. You gotta jump in. I love that.
There's no room for you in the camp. We're a team. I love that about project management. This is a team. There's no I. It's team.
Yeah, I think that's amazing.
Really. We in
Really.
this together. You shine, I shine. You sink, I need to be throwing you a life preserver. Like, it really does help you excel when you understand how to maximize the talents that surround you and embrace them and celebrate them and not look at them as a competition, but as a resource and as someone to be an ally to work with you. And that appreciation and acknowledgement creates value, which is also something that nurtures your mental health.
Yeah. I really love the focus on collaboration, right? Because I think in so many other professional spaces, success looks like a fire sale. Like if I buy these 5 things, that means somebody else didn't get, access to this particular thing. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it almost is this approach where it's almost everyone for themselves, right? I have to outshine this next person. I have to position myself in a way that I am the one who really looks like I am getting the most accolades, all of the promotions. And I love the idea that the approach within project management is rooted in collaboration. You win, I win. The only way for us to get there is to do it together, right? It's like, what do you call those things in do you know, is it in rowing when you see like the people in the long there's like 5 to 6 people, everybody's crew. Right in crew, right? Like there's not the first person and the last person, everybody in the middle just chilling. No, that's not how that works. We're not moving that way. And being intentional that we have to be in sync. I move, you move, ludicrous, just like that. We gotta make sure.
Yeah. 404, I hear you.
That it comes out, right? And I think that that's really important, and really highlighting the beauty of project management is the fact that it is rooted in so much collaboration.
It's a beautiful thing when everyone leans into it. Mm-hmm. It's a great way to restore, right? So if you've gone through career grief or, you haven't found the right role, when you find that right team and you implement that, in my humble opinion, that decreases any PTSD you have from any previous experience or role, right? Because you're feeling valued, your voice matters. They care about what that is. And, those endorphins could be going off in a good way, right? So I think it's great, but I think it takes time to practice that, right? To figure out what that looks like, make sure it's authentic, and not over the top, but it's something that can be consistently done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It takes people time to unlearn things and learn new things, right? So to your point, if you've been in spaces where it felt a little bit more disjointed or in some dysfunctional, and even in some spaces somewhat toxic, when you do finally get into a space where things do feel more authentic and there is a lot more support, you kind of go into it giving people the side eye, like,
Yeah.
is that, are you sure, like, are you, is okay, or is it, there's that sense of uncertainty in trying to get that, and people only really begin to build that level of trust solely through consistency.
Oh,
So,
I've been the side eye person.
and your side eye is great, by the way.
I have been the side eye person. I have been the person with the sign, like, hey, it is great over here. Hello. I have been the person on the fence, like, how is this gonna go? Like, and what how am I gonna help it sway to the betterment,
Mhm.
right? And not sway to the woe is me or oh my gosh, right? So, but I've definitely been the side eye person.
Love it. Appreciate your transparency.
I'm like, what are you saying? What did you mean by that? What did you want me to take away from that? Was that a personal? Is that to me personal? Or is that like a collective statement that you just made? Like, what exactly is going on in this moment? I need clarity.
As they call a thing. I'm a firm believer in that. I'm a firm believer in it. Oh,
Like, what is happening in this moment? Let me take a step back. Can you tell me? And that's where I think I've learned to ask people proactively. Can you let
yeah.
me understand what was the intended messaging for that? Can you help me understand your perspective on that? Because I'm trying to process it and I'm struggling. Can you help me understand where you're coming from?
I want to be very frank. That's one of my favorite things about you. Um, one of my favorite things about you, for absolute certain. And I think that what that does is ultimately really kind of create a level of accountability in when you're working with people, right? And saying, okay, I'm going to call this out. I'm going to do it, with some empathy, with some tact, with some love, and just to ensure that the communication between us is clear so that I don't maybe misinterpret something that you may have meant to say, and that I can hold
Mm-hmm.
you accountable for what you did say. And so when you think about in within other ways within when you're working with your team, what are some other ways that you feel like you're able to really kind of create that level of accountability, even with even with some empathy in those spaces? What are some things that you've done that have been effective?
I think to your point, just be accountable, right? I messed up. Just communicating if I messed up. Just going back and asking for clarity. I think it's the things that can make you I think it's the things that can make you feel embarrassed
Ooh, that's
or or you might feel some kind of way because you felt you should have known something. Like something could be something very simple. I should have caught that. I've been doing this for so long. I should have recognized that and I missed it and it took someone else bring it to your attention. What I've learned, depending on the maturity level of the team, not the age of the person, but the maturity level of the team that you're dealing with, oftentimes they're just like, that's why I'm here. We're here to remind each other. Like they don't make it a thing, but in your mind, you might feel it's a thing because you should have remembered that or you should have known that. But then I think, that's something that you and I talk about often is what does extending grace look like, not only to others, but to yourself? You have to sometimes recognize that this is the first time you might have experienced this specific scenario situation. So remembering that might not have been applicable in that moment, but give yourself a high five for remembering it, when you did. And hopefully it doesn't put you in a bind, right? Whatever that is defined as, and you grow from it, right? I think one thing I love about project management, working with teams and collaborating is how much you learn.
mm-hmm,
It
mm-hmm.
really not only, it really can to your point that you mentioned earlier, it contributes to your personal growth, but it also really, really nourishes your professional development too.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
I like that the ability to not just say that I messed up, but the narrative that's happening in your head at that time, right? What you are saying about yourself, right? That those moments where you're being self-critical can oftentimes get in the way of people becoming transparent. Because oftentimes people may have come, I especially notice when people have come from really from environments in which there was a lot of like criticism and kind of like external pressures. Oftentimes, you begin to internalize that in prep as almost like a defense mechanism that I'm going to judge myself first before anybody else can. And so, shifting that and creating spaces where there isn't necessarily a criticism, but a communication. Like, I had this thing what I would say to my son when he was little, and I would say, "This is not a complaint. This is an observation."
Mm.
And so it automatically would make him take the next thing that I would say very, very differently. It wasn't that I was scolding you or like pointing at all of your soft spots. It was like, hey, I'm noticing something and I want to bring it to your attention. That shifts the dynamic.
I love it. I think there's power in words and the words that we choose to speak. It can set you free or keep you chained, right?
Absolutely.
I was recently watching an interview with Melody Hobson with Ariel Investments. I think she's just a dynamic individual. And one thing she mentioned or referenced in her interview was the importance of a simplistic story. How you share narratives from a simplistic standpoint. So one thing that she said she would do sometimes if she was delivering a message or, however, a message, we'll just stick with that for sake of conversation. On her way in, say if she had an Uber driver, could the Uber driver understand what she was saying? She would repeat the messaging to the Uber driver, and if the Uber driver could explain what she was saying, then she knew that she had landed in a good space because they're not connected to the content, right? Another thing that I thought she shared, she shared a lot of gems, but another thing that I thought she shared was powerful is how people are very acronym driven. And a lot of times people don't even understand the acronyms themselves. Like they can't tell you what the acronym is. And that really resonated with me because each industry has their vernacular, right? And, people just spit it off. And I find myself, let me pivot from the Melody situation. That made me think that how often I find myself communicating with people, you assume I understand what you're saying. I find myself saying that. I'm like, you're assuming I understand what you're saying. What is this what you're saying? And it makes me think, Michelle, are you saying what you need to say? Like, is it landing the way you want it to? So when I heard that, it just made me think about that. Like, I think that's a question I always ask people when people, especially like if there's documentation, if you're community service or, you're at a volunteer event, it's not just in the work, it's like all the different places that we document, right? And when you're writing, for example, in your documentation, are you writing from a place of assumption or are you writing from a place of education?
Ooh, I love that. I really like that. Especially as a person who's worked in hospitals for a very long time. Mm-hmm. Hospitals are totally driven by acronyms and words. And so, when being in those kind of spaces where people are trying to explain something to a family and they're using, and the physician is using, medical language, I'm like, they have no idea what you just said. So let's change the way we communicate to ensure the person is able to receive what you want to receive. And often, even within this moment, thinking, kind of taking those two um, very different industries, but also recognizing very similar issues as it relates to communication, is that when you're communicating things in a particular way and people don't understand, it's not everyone who has a level of comfort and confidence to be able to say, I didn't understand that. Can you explain that to me differently? And so that alleviates that level of kind of like disconnect, even in that moment, just by removing some of those barriers.
Which can impact someone's mental health because they don't feel like they can share. They don't feel it's a place that they can express vulnerability or seek knowledge beyond their own understanding or clarity. It's not even always about understanding. Sometimes it's just about clarity, right?
And, judgment. Are they going to think I'm stupid because I didn't understand that or whatever? Like all of those kind of the narratives we continue to say to ourselves and within our own head. Oh, that was so good. That was really good. Oh,
All right, Val. So, what have you learned about your own mental health? I mean, you've been at this a minute. So, what have you learned about your own mental health that made you a better leader or teammate?
I learned that a I am not great early mornings. And that may seem like a very simple thing and may not seem like it's related to my mental health, but being able to recognize in what areas and spaces and even times in which you are at your best can really create not just a lot of trust within yourself to know how you're going to show up, but also creates norms and how people are able to engage with you effectively. So trying to have a very complex conversation with me at 6:30 in the morning is probably not going to yield the same level of insight and understanding and processing if you have this very same conversation with me at like 8:30. And
Yeah.
so that creates a lot of trust, and also it creates a lot of boundaries because people understand what to expect and know how to approach you in order to get the best outcome that they're going to be able to get. And then that thus reduces a lot of internal stress of feeling like I need to force myself to perform at a time and place where I know it is not my strong suit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, being able to recognize when are the times that I function the best and structuring things to align with that as much as possible. So that would be it for me. How about you?
I like the time. I like that time piece. I'm gonna make an add on to that, and I would say recognize time zones too.
Oh, yes. So true. So true. Because I have lots of project managers I work with teams across multiple time zones, across multiple countries, and that people getting pinged at 2 and 3 and 4 a.m. and having that level of anxiety that they need to hurry up and respond to. Oh, man, that's rough.
Boundary setting.
Mhm.
So to answer your question, for me, it would be understanding triggers. But and that indirectly piggybacks on you when you just shared understanding, hey, 6:30 a.m., 6:30 a.m., that's not where you're gonna get the best me. But I think as a project manager, it helps to know when your team functions the best, operational from an operational standpoint, what is their prime time? And everyone's different. Some people they how their preferred communication, when do they like to meet, how long do they like to meet, what are their pet peeves, is your calendar current, did you not recognize their calendar, are you honoring their settings, available, away, do not disturb, are you pinging them when that's it? Some people have this mindset, I know you're not on do not disturb, but you read it when you come off, so they send it anyway. But do they interpret it that way? I know
Mhm.
it might not seem like relevant, but sometimes it is relevant. It could come up when you leave, like especially if you do a stop, start, continue, what you want someone to start doing, stop doing, or continue. One of those, something like that could easily come up in a situation like that. You would, what? I
Oh,
was
yeah,
sending you a note.
legit. That's so true. Oh, that was
Or
so good.
or someone that types in all capital, sends communication in all capital letters. Like, are you yelling? And they speak with exclamation points.
Yeah, or did you just not realize, or did you just not care that your cats was on? Ah, that's a legit one.
What's happening right now?
That's real. Man, this was great. This was great. That was a great answer. I love that.
You rocked it out too. Well,
Yeah.
we hope that you enjoyed this mid-month wellness check-in with Val and I in regards to calming the chaos. Of course, we love the messages that some send us individually and collectively. We love it. If you have any suggestions of topics that you would like for us to address, please let us know. And we hope that the rest of your mental health awareness month is phenomenal and you learn something new that can help you function in a Zen place.
Absolutely. So, guys, see you next month. We are on the third Thursday. What are we? Second Thursday? Third Thursday of the month, I think we're at. So, see you guys at our next mid-month mental health check-in.
Take care and keep your
Bye.
stride.
Bye, guys.